Hi, everyone, and welcome to Devil's Advocate. I'm Todd Shepard, filling in for John Caldera. I'm the Independence Institute investigative reporter, and this is a special edition of Devil's Advocate because tonight we have a very special guest with us. And this person worked for state government for 2 years, specifically the Department of Revenue. And our guest tonight is going to make some very serious claims and allegations about things he says he witnessed inside the Department of Revenue, specifically some things he said he heard from the executive director, Barbara Broll. Now, before I introduce him and bring him in, I would like to say up front that our guest is not going to claim that anybody broke the law. Still, it's very important to know that what he's going to talk about tonight involves some very serious ethical issues. And beyond that, it raises questions about the health of transparency within our state government. So with that table being set, let's welcome in our guest, Dan Bradley.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, and we're glad to have you on Devil's Advocate. Dan, before we get to your claims, we've got a little bit of groundwork to lay. So maybe take 90 seconds and give me just the professional resume before you started with the Department of Revenue.
Prior to joining the Department of Revenue, I worked 28 years with the Federal Bureau of Investigations.
Easy job.
That was a great job.
I bet it was.
I truly enjoyed it. I worked initially in the Phoenix Division, went from the Phoenix Division to the Washington, D.C. office. During that time in D.C., I was assigned to the House International Relations Committee, where I was part of a 3-member team that investigated the U.S. role in the shipment of arms by Iraq to Bosnia. When I left that position, I went on to a supervisory position at FBI headquarters. During that time, I was one of a group of supervisors who investigated the financing of the 1996 federal presidential campaign, the election that was won by President Clinton and Vice President Gore.
And this would be some of the China money laundering, you might call it, right?
That was the area that was under review, right. Yes, sir. Subsequent to that, I was assigned to Southern Colorado, the Denver FBI division, where I was the senior supervisory resident agent responsible for the FBI offices in Colorado Springs, Pueblo, and Durango. My last 7 years in the FBI, I was assigned to the FBI Director's Office. There I conducted internal investigations relating to primarily allegations of sexual harassment and EEO matters, but also other internal investigations. And I got to teach around the world. I primarily taught public corruption issues, taught in over 20 countries, El Salvador, Bangkok, Budapest, I taught at The Hague. I was greatly, I had a great opportunity to travel around the world and teach law enforcement ethics, public corruption issues.
And at the Department of Revenue, just a little bit more than 2 years, what did you do for the Department of Revenue?
I was the Director of Security and Investigations for the Colorado Lottery, which is a portion of the Department of Revenue.
Now, I think it's important for people to understand how you and I sort of found each other, so they have a little bit of that background too. Maybe just a quick 15 to 30 second summary of that.
Sure. I was concerned about an issue that I had seen regarding deletion of emails and limitation of emails, and at that point, when I left the Department of Revenue, I brought the issue to the attention of Jeff Crank, who lives in Colorado Springs, who's politically active. He contacted you, and then you and I got together. All
right, so that's who you are professionally, and that's quite a resume. The travel, the responsibilities, and certainly I think the longevity says something about your credibility too. But now let's get to the meat of the story. Let's get to the main menu. Why you're here? Tell us what you witnessed and what you say happened during your tenure in the Department of Revenue.
Well, as you indicated in the beginning of the interview, there's no indication that any of this was illegal or that it was even a violation of policy. But due to my experience as it relates to public corruption issues and in efforts to limit corruption from occurring, I became concerned specifically in one meeting which occurred in early 2014, where I was directed, along with other individuals, to delete emails that related to how we were responding to our core request, specifically what type of information we would release as it related to that request. When I was asked by the Director of the Department of Revenue, Barbara Broll, to delete those groups of emails along with other people, my immediate response was, are you familiar with Lois Lerner? And that I was going to go to the Attorney General's office to obtain an opinion about the legality of the issue. When I contacted the Attorney General's office, after they reviewed the matter, they said, okay, Dan, it's legal because there's no criminal statute against it and there's no policy against it. So at that point in time, I followed the Director of Department of Revenue's instructions because she was my reviewing official as it related to my employment. And at that point in time, I deleted the emails in question. But I was concerned. And I made a mental note that when I left the Department of Revenue that I would bring the matter to the forefront. Additionally, during the time frame that I worked with the lottery, on a couple of occasions at least, I was requested to limit email communications as it related to particular topics.
So in other words, if you need to communicate with some other people in the department about how you're going about this business, pick up the phone, have the conversation in person, don't send the email. Correct.
And that also concerned me for the same reason as deletion of emails. You know, I truly believe it's essential that the individuals in government act in as transparent a manner as possible. And when the government officials are taking actions to prevent that from occurring, if a request comes for a core request or in the federal level for a freedom of information request, there's something wrong with how that government action is being taken.
Now let's step back and sort of redefine these emails you say you were asked to delete, because you were working on a Colorado Open Records request. So someone requested a set of documents from the Department of Revenue, and you were not, so let me say that again, you were not ordered to delete any document that would have, the technical term really is it's a responsive document. You were not told to delete responsive documents.
No, I was not told to delete any email communications or any other documentation as it related specifically to what was responsive to that core request.
But what you were asked to delete was, you're working within the department, and let's say you email Jane Smith and you say, hey Jane, can we get in the conference room at 3 o'clock to look at this set of documents maybe? We'll go through them, decide what's responsive or so forth. So these are what I might call workflow documents.
That would be correct.
Okay, so it was the workflow documents that you say Executive Director Barbara Brohl asked you to delete.
Yes, sir.
You and others.
Myself and others, yes.
When you got this verbal directive from the executive director, were you the only one present, or were numerous people present?
There were other people present in the room at the time that direction was made.
Have you ever been disciplined? Were you ever disciplined in your time at the Department of Revenue?
There were differences of opinion in regards to how certain things were handled, but no, I was never disciplined in any way, shape, or form.
Okay. Really quickly for our audience, I should let them know that you and I went to the Department of Revenue together, and we got Mr. Bradley's employment reviews. And let me just read a couple of pages or a couple of sentences from this. In this one element, job knowledge, rating is successful. By the way, there's only 3 ratings: needs improvement, successful, or excellent. You were always successful or excellent. I never saw a needs improvement anywhere.
Yes, sir.
But in this job knowledge, the rating is successful, and it says Dan played a key role in responding to multiple core responses, and then the rest is blacked out. But it notes here that you have some expertise and that they appreciate the way you handled yourself in working these core requests.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Something a couple of other pages down the line. This is a summary where, again, the rating was successful. And it says, Dan consistently and substantially exceeded expectations during this rating period. He serves as a role model for others in security departments throughout the industry. Would you say that that is a good reflection of how you and management got along at your time in the Department of Revenue?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any documentation, an audio, maybe an audio voicemail of any kind, an email of any kind, that proves your allegation against Ms. Brohl?
No, sir.
Okay. Why not?
Well, as I indicated, I was following the direction to delete those emails, and that what I was instructed to do so, and it would be counterproductive in my mindset for an individual to direct somebody to do something via email when they're already instructing people to either delete emails or restrict or limit the number of emails as it relates to particular topics.
In other words, she would have been aware that sending that email could have been precarious if it had ever crossed her mind to send that email. she realized the precarious nature of creating a document trail.
Well, especially after I advised her that I was going to the department, to the Attorney General's office for an opinion as it related to the issue, yes.
Do you remember, and now again, you weren't asked to delete the documents that were responsive to the Cora request, but do you remember what that Cora request was about?
I do not.
Okay, but you do remember what time of year?
Yes, it was early 2014.
Okay. To your knowledge, had anything embarrassing or illegal been disclosed in, again, what I'm sort of terming as workflow emails, this second level of emails that weren't these directly responsive documents? Anything embarrassing or illegal that you saw?
In my mind, there was nothing that would make that context correct, no.
Okay. So if I'm at home watching you, the questions I would certainly want to ask are, why did you come forward now and not when you were an employee of the Department of Revenue?
After I received the opinion from the Attorney General's office in regards to the legality of the activity and that it was not a violation of policy, I realized, first off, I was required to follow the actions or directions of my executive officer. Secondly, I realized I would have no protection under the whistleblower statute because I wasn't bringing forth anything that was illegal or anything that was against policy. So this was an issue that I put aside with the mental note that, look, when the time came that I was leaving government service, that I was going to make an effort to prevent this type of issue from coming or occurring again, either by attempting to create a statute within the state of Colorado that would prohibit this type of activity, or by contacting the governor's office for attempting to get an executive order or policy as it related to this type of activity.
So what would you say to someone who says, this is just a guy who's wanting he's maybe had a successful career in the FBI. It was a low-key career, but now he's going to get 15 minutes of fame by coming forward and making these accusations against the executive director of the Colorado Department of Revenue. I don't believe this guy. What would you say to that person watching at home right now that thinks what I just said?
You know, I've spent 30 years in government service. A significant portion of that related to preventing or investigating corruption issues within the federal government, internationally. This is my passion. You know, I truly believe that it's essential that the government act in a transparent manner, and that a failure to do so creates a perception among the general public that truly negatively impacts the ability of government to operate in an effective and efficient manner. I had a teacher in high school that said government's only slightly more important than the air you breathe because it determines the quality of that air. If we lose trust in our government, we are, as a government, are not going to be able to operate in a manner that's in the best interest of the general public. It's a two-way street. We got to maintain that trust relationship, and transparency is the key to that.
I know I hinted at it a little bit earlier when we talked about your performance reviews, but, and this is a direct question, and so it sounds sort of goofy, but do you have an axe to grind against the Department of Revenue?
No, sir. I was treated very well there. I greatly enjoyed working with the Colorado Lottery, working within the state of Colorado. As I indicated, what Ms. Brohl directed wasn't criminal and wasn't a criminal matter, it wasn't a violation of policy. I just think that there's always opportunities to improve how government operates, and that's why I'm here. It's not to grind an axe against anybody. It's to attempt to improve how government operates within the state of Colorado.
One of the things I find interesting about your claim is the fact that your service at the Department of Revenue came after this long tenure at the FBI. And I know that you and I have talked on different occasions, and you've mentioned that, you know, look, when I was in the feds, when I worked for the feds, even if I deleted an email, there was still a way to go back and get it. Talk to me a little bit about your experience. I mean, did you ever handle FOIA requests at the federal level? Were documents of your own ever culled because of someone else's FOIA request?
Well, there were times where documents were called in connection with the FOIA request. I didn't have any direct, we had involvement in putting together the responses in connection with FOIA requests. That was handled separately within the FBI. But emails and other communications are archived. And, you know, even if you delete an email on the federal level, it still exists. It could still be.
So it's on a server somewhere.
It's on a server, and it can be re-accessed in connection with a Freedom of Information request. On the state level, what I learned was that since they use a Google email system, if you delete the email and then you go into the deleted emails and delete it again, that email no longer exists. It's no longer available for the general public to seek access to as it relates to a Cora request.
You bring up a great issue, Google for Government, and this is something I've been investigating for over a year, so it really is serendipitous that you and I sort of stumbled across each other through Jeff Crank, our mutual friend in Colorado Springs. But as you know, I sort of created a summary of your allegations, and I sent this to the Department of Revenue because we wanted to be able to include their response in tonight's show. So we've got some graphics so people can read along with that response at home, but here's what they answered when we showed them the allegations that you would make on tonight's show. The Colorado Department of Revenue takes Colorado Open Records Act policy and procedure very seriously and works hard to ensure that we are responsive and transparent. To that end, we have dedicated a resource to coordinate and respond to all Cora requests. It is our policy to release responsive documents to the fullest extent required by law. During the only instance in which Ms. Barbara Brohl, Executive Director for CDOR, was involved in a Cora request that required action by Mr. Bradley, she actually had to direct him to release responsive documents. Finally, the department stands by its policy to be transparent and responsive to all Cora requests. That is the response from Lynn Granger, who's the communications spokesperson for the Department of Revenue. Your response when you hear their response?
Well, I think it's important to point out that they didn't indicate in that response that there was any indication that they had never instructed people to delete emails or to limit the communication via emails.
Well, let me stop you right there. Let me try this. Let me just measure you against this sentence one more time. During the only instance in which Ms. Barbara Brohl was involved in a Cora request that required action by you, Mr. Bradley, she actually had to direct him to release responsive documents. So what if someone were to say, no, the Department of Revenue says this is the only time they ever interacted about Cora at all?
Well, I did, as the reviews indicate, handle multiple Cora requests.
Right.
Ms. Brohl, her management style is very direct and very involved. So I don't necessarily agree with the fact that there was only one time that she had any direct involvement in the Cora request. And in regards to the comment about having to be directed to respond fully, in that instance, if I'm recalling the instance they're referring to,
sure.
The issue involved two requests from TV stations for information in regards to what we refer to as integrity compliance investigations.
Okay.
And they are criminal investigations.
Okay.
DOR has a great familiarity with Cora requests, but not necessarily in connection with responding to law enforcement generated Cora requests.
All right.
And
so were you considered a law enforcement officer then for the Department of Revenue?
I supervise law enforcement officers in my position as director.
And by the way, that's in that supervisory capacity. That's what specifically they were referencing when they said you substantially exceed expectations during the rating period. You serve as a role models for others. This was in a management. They were talking about your management style and your leadership capabilities. So in that essence, they rated you very highly.
Yes, sir. And in regards to the law enforcement portion, my primary concern, if that's the issue they're referring to, was A, protecting individuals who were subjects to those investigations from being brought to the attention of the general public because they had either been not charged or not convicted. It was also protecting the individuals who are private citizens who assist us in an undercover capacity in connection with those investigations. And because of my concern in that matter, I brought the issue again to the attention of the Attorney General's office and requested an opinion as to what should and should not be released. Mm-hmm. And the opinion that was provided to the Department of Revenue was what was subsequently followed in connection with that release of information. And that information subsequently did not release pending investigation information or the identity of the parties who are private citizens who assist us in our investigations.
A little while back, you said that you made this mental note, hey, when I get out of the Department of Revenue, I'm going to I'm going to make an issue of this somehow to someone. And you sort of casually mentioned that you might contact the governor's office.
Yes, sir.
Did you ever do that?
No, sir, I did not.
Okay. So also a little, just a few moments ago, you talked about Google for Government. And
Yes,
again, this has been a big issue for me. I've been following the implementation of Google for Government for 3 or 4 years. Originally, I was a big proponent. I was hoping that the state of Colorado, specifically the state, because they were an agency big enough to do it. I wouldn't hope that counties or maybe some municipalities would do it. It would depend on their size and their IT capabilities. But I was hopeful that the state of government might actually utilize Google for Government, because I assumed, naively now I see, that a government employee's email account would be very similar to my Gmail account, which is to say it has so much space, very little would get deleted. I mean, I only really delete about 10% of my emails in my personal Gmail account, and the rest of them I basically let flow into an archive so that I can go back and search them at any time. But you say, and I've learned independently on my own research in the last year, that Google for Government provides archiving problems in terms, it basically creates the opposite of what you said you experienced at the federal level, where if the email gets deleted, there's a server somewhere that somebody could go back to and get that, or even if it's deleted, rebuild the data. You're saying Google for Government creates this sort of hole where it just goes, these emails, you describe it for me.
That is my understanding, that if you go into an email that is in your inbox and you delete that email, then you go into your deleted email box and you delete that email from the deleted email box. That email no longer exists. It's not archived, which is not how the federal system operates. You know, to my knowledge, every email that I generated in the course of my FBI career was archived and would still be able to be accessed.
Not that they would come forward, but are there others inside the Department of Revenue that would corroborate your story, the key component of your story, that Executive Director Barbara Brohl stood in front of a group, sounds like a small handful of employees, and said, hey, these workflow emails, let's make sure we delete them at the end of the day?
Yeah, I truly believe they would be able to come forward, because, as I indicated, I was very strong in my statement during the course of that meeting about my concerns about the legality of the issue. I was wrong. It was a legal request by the Director of the Department of Revenue. But saying that, I would believe those people, based on my response, would have a clear memory of the event.
So now that you've seen emails and FOIA requests from the federal side, and you had this incident that you claim appalled you, and you made this mental note, what is the fix, and who is the fixer? What are the steps that have to be taken now, and who are the people to take these steps and get it done?
Well, I think there's 3 potential steps. First off, you create an archive system so that there isn't the potential of being able to go in and delete these types of emails from the system, and therefore not be traceable or able to be recreated by as a result of a court request. You need policy. You need a policy that specifically would prohibit this type of activity, and that can be done either in each department, Department of Revenue or the other departments, but
Right.
It should be government-wide in the state of Colorado. The last piece is you need a statute that makes the efforts to delete this type of information, either from the Google process or from an archive process, illegal, so that we have a better belief that we have a transparency in government, and that this type of information is accessible subsequent to it being created.
Let's go back very quickly, too, because I think it's a key part of the credibility of your story, what you said about you looked at the whistleblower statute, because I think that sets up some interesting, not an interesting dilemma, but it does show why someone in your situation might not want to come forward. You know, you and I were talking on the phone the other day, and I said it's been my experience that the reason most state employees don't want to come forward is because they're afraid that they'll get fired, and that somehow, most importantly, that their pension will be harmed. That's really what concerns most of the state employees I know. But talk to me about what you know about the whistleblower law as it related to what you were investigating.
Well, as I indicated, my understanding as to the whistleblower law is that you're protected if you bring a question forward or an issue forward.
But you can't start off at the media level. I mean, you can't go
It would be brought in internally. That's correct.
Yeah. But so, I mean, in essence, if I understand you right, what you're saying is you looked at the whistleblower law. It says you have to go to your next chain in command.
Correct.
You did that, and once you realized that they were unconcerned because, as the Attorney General's office had indicated to you, there was no illegality here, you really were almost in a no-choice situation.
No-choice situation in regards to bringing that matter forward because my management hierarchy already were aware of this situation.
Really quickly, as to the Department of Revenue's response and saying we respond to all of our open records and we're very transparent, this is a Denver Post editorial. They tried to get some documents as they relate to who are the owners of various marijuana businesses in Colorado, and they were told they could get them for $10,000. This editorial starts off, lawmakers need to rectify an inexcusable situation at the marijuana division inside the DOR. The agency refuses to release basic ownership information for marijuana businesses without exorbitant fees. Did you see anything where people tried to use fees to block Cora requests? We've got about 30 seconds left.
I did not. I was not involved in that type of activity as far as what costs would be involved in providing the information in response to Cora requests.
Dan Bradley, thanks so much for coming forward and telling us your story tonight. We really appreciate it. That's all the time we have tonight for Devil's Advocate. In the last few seconds I have, I'd like to say rest in peace, Lance Clem, a dedicated public servant to the state of Colorado. I'm Todd Shepard signing off for Devil's Advocate.